Well, good evening. Thanks for having me. In this fine old hall with all of you gathered here, I kind of wish I had something more exciting to say, but this is philosophy after all. Well, yes, I'm going to argue for the atheist position tonight, and I'm afraid I'm going to stray from Dr. Craig's suggestion that I first tear down his arguments. I'm going to try and start off with a little bit of my own first, a little bit of building up of the atheist position. So I've titled my talk, The Irrelevance of Religion, and I'll get on to explaining what that means in a minute here. Now there's two positions that have become standard to describe for the atheist position. One is what's called positive atheism, and that assumes that the atheist actually believes that there is no God. In other words, the atheist is actually making a positive claim about the way things work in the world. There's another position called negative atheism, which simply poses the problem as a lack of belief. Atheists lack belief in deities. And by contrast, this poses no claim whatsoever, except for the claim that you don't happen to have a certain belief. Now, Dr. Craig has said in print that there are no good arguments for the atheist position. And I think I'd like to try and show you why that is in just a second. And also I'd like to try and establish the burden of proof is the name of the issue in philosophy. It's a question of who owes us an explanation and what's going to count as a proof here. So the positive atheist position, what are we looking at how would we go about trying to prove the positive atheist position? Well, let me point out the claim there is no God is what we call an unrestricted negative. That is, there's no specific area in which you're being told you have to demonstrate this for. For example, I could try and prove to you that there's no elephant in this room right now, but I doubt I could prove to you that there are no elephants, period. So the atheist is pictured here as trying to prove that there is no God. Now, the problem I see with that is that if I were to demonstrate somehow that God doesn't happen to exist in this solar system, somebody could immediately come back and say, oh, but perhaps he's over there in Alpha Centauri. And if I managed to get to Alpha Centauri and show that there was no God there, well, there's another solar system down the line. Now, the problem is that in order to prove a negative like that, I'm going to have to be omniscient. I'm going to have to be able to account for all of the possible places that this being God could possibly exist in order to demonstrate that he doesn't. So the long and the short of it is, in order to prove God does not exist, I'd effectively have to prove that I am God, since I would be the omniscient being doing this proving. Now that's too high a demand. I don't think any atheist really wants to become God by doing this. Now, if Dr. Craig suggests that there are no good arguments for atheism, well, here's a reason. There's no good arguments for positive atheism, certainly, because it looks like those arguments simply couldn't be given to begin with. Now, what about negative atheism? Of course, the situation is different there. All we're really committed to with negative atheism is, in fact, that we're open to argument, we're willing to consider whatever evidence is given and reply to that, or be willing to change our minds. Now, that's effectively what we're up to here tonight. So, in terms of the burden of the proof issue, let me point out, it seems like it would be impossible to prove that there is no God. It seems like if we were to start out with claims, the person making a claim is typically the one held to owe us some kind of a reason why they think that's true. The theist seems to be in that position. If the theist claims God exists, well, we need a reason why that should be so. Now, given that it doesn't seem like it's possible to give an argument against God's existence, it doesn't seem likely that we should quibble about who owes what kind of burden of proof. Pretty clearly, it's simpler to simply examine the proofs for God's existence that we have and try and determine what they actually come down to. So I think of negative atheism as kind of a minimum condition here. It's not necessarily something that any atheist believes, but what it does is establish some boundaries for what we have to prove. Anyone giving us a positive claim like the theist needs to give us some kind of a reason. And if we find that reason to be good, or if we can't think of any reasons against it, then we should be willing to change our mind about that. I want to add a personal note in here about this. This is the reason for my talk, for the title of my talk about the irrelevance of religion. As far as I'm concerned, or let me put it this way, I encounter the view quite frequently that the atheist must be bound up with the question of religion as much as the theist is. In other words, we're committed to war upon each other, and we're both going vigorously head to head. I think of atheism as something quite different. To be an atheist is to be committed to living an entirely this worldly life. So in my thinking, in my daily practices, I have no room or I have no role for the supernatural or the transcendent. Essentially, religion is irrelevant to my life, and that's how I like to live it. Now, having said that there might be no good arguments for the claim that God does not exist, there is a special case of claim that might allow us to make arguments against this thing. And let me try. Okay, start over again. What did I do? Yeah, that's it. The punishment has already begun. Okay. So I'm going to try and give you some arguments for positive atheism tonight. And I'm going to start out with the incoherence of the concept of God and follow that up with the problem of evil. Now, I think I probably better pick up the pace here because I've got a fair bit to scroll through.